Today's book club meeting is about chapter 4, which is called Self Forgiveness as a Productivity Tool. And as I was reading over the chapter, I was thinking, first of all, I absolutely stand behind the title of the chapter. I think that it is what we're talking about here. Like it is the basic, you know, sort of this is the stuff of what we're talking about. Um, that self forgiveness is so essential. However, that said, I felt like it's not clear enough. And so I'm actually thinking I'm going to retitle this chapter something much clearer, which is something along the lines of self compassion versus the should monster. And these are the two sides, the two things that we're battling with, because this whole section 1 of the book, is called What's Stopping You? And the should monster is what's stopping you, and what will get you started again is self compassion. And so I really wanted to highlight that and make that clear. All right, I am not seeing comments roll up because of whatever is happening here. I'm going to reload over here and see if I can get the comments to come up because I'm not seeing them live. And I don't know if you're actually here or not. Are we together? Are we together here? I hope so. I don't know. Give me 1 second, you guys. Hang tight. I'll be right back. I'm going to try not to lose my train of thought. I don't want to reload this screen because if I reload this screen, I may lose everything. Here we go. Oh, I am live. Good. Perfect. So I'm going to get that open so I can hopefully see the comments over on that screen, which is why I'm going to look over there. So chat. There it is. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, awesome. All right, now, yeah, so I can only see the comments over here because they're not showing up on my screen over here, so I'm going to be going back and forth a little bit, but that's fine. It'll all work fine. All right, to get back to what I was saying, I feel like we need to get ultra clear here about what this chapter is about and what it's for. And what I'm trying to do is promote the idea of self-compassion for everybody all the time, that you need to prioritize taking care of yourself and forgiving yourself for, whatever it is that you imagine you need punishment for. I just had a really interesting interview last night with Honor. What's Honor's last name? I'm going to forget off the top of my head. For an Australian podcast, and I'll let you know about it when it happens. We spent a ton of time talking about this idea of self-forgiveness and how the idea of that we sort of carry with us is that if you don't punish yourself hard enough for your transgressions against, keeping trust with yourself, keeping faith with yourself, that you'll do it again. It's all about like keeping a really hard line and making sure that you don't, misbehave over again. And it's just not a thing. It's just not how it works. I mean, we've learned that over the last, I want to say 50 years, that like punishing prisoners more vigorously does not prevent crime, does not prevent recidivism. We've learned that like beating children is not the way to get them to learn and become productive adults. Certainly there are people who disagree about that. I disagree with them heartily, and I think most of us here would probably agree that that is an extremely bad idea for how you treat children in order to help them do better in their lives. And I've written a post about this. We also treat like our dogs better than we treat ourselves. That typically we most of us understand that the way to train a dog, the way to get a dog to be happy and live its life well, but also behave and do what it needs to do, is not to beat it up and shove its nose and its pee on the floor or whatever people used to do with dogs, but to treat it with kindness, boundaries, and consistency. And if there's anything all of this is about, it's about kindness, boundaries, and consistency. And that is what you need just as much as everybody else. And I know it can feel terrifying to let go of that punitive mindset that you might fall into with yourself, because it feels like that's the only way to force compliance in yourself. But think about what you know about how relationships work with other people. That when you are kind to people and you give them clear boundaries and you give them information about how to treat you and how to, um, consistent like feedback on their work or whatever, like other people, your relationship with them gets better. They feel happier. They do more things that serve them. They do more things that help you. This is a universal principle for how to create behavior that's the behavior that you want. So I think that this is super, super important. And it's such a like major just shift for almost everybody. Um, and I understand if you are if you find it really difficult to implement this, but it's just so, so important. Um, Here's the thing, here's the way this works. When you beat yourself up, and this is why it doesn't work, rather, when you beat yourself up over something, you say, like, okay, say you promised yourself that you're going to spend an hour on your writing in a given day, and you don't. You don't spend any time on it. And you get to the end of your day and you're exhausted and you're thinking, you sit around thinking to yourself, like, I'm such an idiot. I'm so um, weak. I'm so lazy. This is ridiculous. Like, I had that hour. I could have spent this and I didn't. And look what I did. And, just really awful to yourself and just talking to yourself and just telling yourself what a total jerkwad you are. When you do that, essentially you're shaming yourself. You're trying to use shame to cause change in your behavior. But anybody who's read Brene Brown's work, which I think is really, really important about this idea of shame versus guilt and, the role of vulnerability in creating more happier lives, but also being more effective, will understand this idea. But basically, when you put shame around something, when you put something in like a box of shame, nobody walks toward that intentionally. Nobody walks toward a situation in which you're going to feel shame on purpose. You run away from that. You get angry about that. You reject that. You refuse to engage with it. So the more shame you pile on yourself, the more you are likely to run away from the thing that causes you shame, which in this case would be writing your book, right? So writing your book and the fact that you haven't written your book is causing you shame, and therefore you you're even less likely to do it. The difference here, there's a little bit of a difference. So there's two different emotions, sort of negative emotions about not doing things that we can feel, or I mean, there's lots, but there's two main categories here that I want to talk about. One is shame, and shame is an absolutely counterproductive thing to use on yourself or anybody else. It's one of those things I see happening out in the world where, on Twitter or whatever, where people are shaming other people for behavior. And then that shame causes backlash, right? The people who are being shamed are like, screw you, I've got my own reasons, I got my own thing, and you know nothing, da 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 da. You're not causing any change in that person by shaming them, but helping them to understand the effect of their actions. They might feel guilt. Guilt is a different emotion, and guilt can be a productive emotion in the sense that guilt is about feeling bad about your actions, not about yourself. Shame is at your core. Shame is inside of you. Something's wrong with you. Something is essentially wrong. Whereas guilt is about feeling bad about actions that you've done and wanting to make up for those things. So if you do something bad to somebody, you can feel guilt for that. That's okay. It's not fun, but it's can be okay because it can cause you to say, like, I am essentially a good person. I did a bad thing and I want to make up for that. So I'm going to apologize very authentically and deeply, and I'm going to do what I can to make up for it. That is how guilt can function in a positive way, as opposed to shame, where you think, I'm a bad person, there's nothing I can do about this, it's not fixable because I'm bad at an essential level. So I did this bad thing because that's just how I do things, and so screw it. And that's where the anger comes out in shame. So these are a very important distinction to understand about the way you blame yourself and you treat yourself. It's okay to feel a little bit guilty about not doing something that you thought you wanted to do or you intended to do. Say, like, oh, bad action, that's too bad. Then you forgive yourself and you move on. Whereas if you feel shame about it, You don't forgive yourself. You continue to beat up on yourself, and it becomes a shame spiral where you just cannot get out of it. It just feels so awful whenever you get near it that you can't stand it anymore. Um, okay, so I'm looking at some comments here, things coming in. Susie says, I think I get this. It's like you don't tell a kid they're naughty, but they did a naughty thing. Exactly the point. Yeah, you do exactly that. You say, that is a bad action. Don't do that thing. That hurts somebody's feelings, or that's dangerous, or whatever it is. You're a good person. You're able to overcome this and do it differently. And the kid can feel bad, but then they are able to move on from that. Yeah. Susanna says, separating action from character. Exactly. So feeling guilty, Amy, about not tackling your book is fine, but when you feel guilty, you can have forgiveness. And forgiveness is the step that you need to take in order to move forward. Self-forgiveness, self-compassion. Understand that things happened. It didn't work that way. I'm not happy with that action. That's fine. I'm going to let it go, and we're going to move forward from here, right? Water under the bridge. You cannot go back and get those days that you didn't work on your book, but you can start today and you can move forward because you're a good person and you know that this is something that's important to you. Okay. David says, don't say anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to your best friend. Yes, very good advice. And one of the things we talked about, I think, in this chapter is the idea of talking to yourself in the second person, saying you to yourself, using your own name, saying, Jessica, I know you're freaking out about this right now, but you're okay. You can handle this. And allowing that feeling to dissipate through comforting yourself as if you were your own best friend. Liz says, if this is the opposite of how I was raised, it's tough to change that mindset. Liz, that is such a good observation and so apropos to the should monster, because the point I want to make about the should monster is that very frequently the should monster is other people's voices or society's voice, like an outside voice coming at you and telling you things that you don't necessarily believe. Think about this. When you make your list of shoulds to create the should monster, think about the should monster activity. Some of those things, possibly a lot of those things, are actually other people or other sort of entities talking to you and telling you things about your behavior that you may not actually believe at a deep level. So Liz, I imagine you believe that kindness, consistency, and boundaries are a really great way to help people and animals be their best selves and behave in ways that serve them and help everybody. I'm sure, I'm like 90% sure you would agree with that statement. And if the way you were raised was like, that's not how you do it, you beat kids and animals and yourself into compliance, you don't believe that anymore. And yet you still have that voice in your head telling you that that's the case. So the more you can identify, oh, that's my mother's voice, that's my teacher's voice, that's my father's voice, that's not me, the more you can have empathy for the you that you were in the moment when you heard that and how painful that was for you, and say, like, I understand, younger me, that you're trying to keep me safe, but it's okay. I'm okay. You can relax. It's fine. Dad's not saying that stuff to us anymore. We're just going to move on from here. Bethany has a question. I'm a missionary in Japan, and Asian culture tends to be much more of an honor shame culture than American culture. Have you experienced cultural differences in the creative process? Brene Brown's books are getting translated into Japanese, and I think it'll be huge. I hope it's huge. I think I have not observed cultural differences, but I haven't been paying attention to that particularly. And quite honestly, I've worked with some Asian Americans, but not a lot of Asian Americans, and I haven't worked with any Asians in my actual, in the Creative Focus workshop as students. I worked with a person who's living in Asia, but people who are living in Asia, no, that's true. That's not true. Several Asians actually, and but I have not noticed. I'm thinking back, it's 2 or 3 people who live in Asia who are ethnically Asian as well, but I haven't noticed any difference in them from other students of mine. They didn't pop out as anything different. I think this is something that's super universal, actually. Although it may be harder to reframe it as I don't believe in shame if you come from a culture that's like, we believe in shame. Like, that may be really different. Like that moment of saying, like, I was just saying to Liz, about reframing this and thinking like, oh, this younger version of myself that I need to protect, and understand that she's trying to sort of stand up for me and protect me from the danger of being shamed. Um, that moment of thinking like, I as an adult don't believe that this is the way I want to be or how I ought to act, um, and therefore I'm going to change my beliefs and act differently. if if you believe the dominant culture that says shame is the way to go, shame is, you know, how it should be, then it may be harder to make that break and to say, I don't believe what my dominant culture says. Because right now in American culture and most Western culture, although there are plenty of outliers, I think the dominant understanding of behavior change and positive development has to do with what I'm saying of like, you know, reinforcement, positive reinforcement, boundaries, and consistency. That is what we now believe culturally, mostly, although certainly not across the board. Susie's nodding. That's awesome. Um, so Julia says, this may be my takeaway for the day. All I feel is shame for having not already established a great routine to do my work every day, which is maybe why I don't. Turns my studio from a happy place into like Damocles chamber. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that, like things that you really care about and that you want to do, it's like they grow like poison ivy on the outside of them. You can't touch them because if you touch them, you start feeling shame about what you haven't done in the past. And there's nothing you can do about what you haven't done in the past. So you have to learn to forgive yourself for those things or you can't move forward. Let's see. Good. Bethany says counseling is a huge and beautiful tool for tackling the should monster. It absolutely is. Highly recommended to any and all who would like to participate in that. But when we don't have that available, we still can do a lot ourselves. Okay. Counseling and CBT. Good. All right. Great. Julia says, when you have the outside structure of a chronic condition bearing down on you, it's very difficult to accept the boundaries it creates. Um, I think that's probably very true. That I've witnessed that with a lot of students and participants in the Creative Focus workshop, who have chronic conditions of various kinds. That the first hurdle they have to overcome is uh, understanding that their top one of the day, every day, is to care for their physical selves. Or if it's a mental health issue, their mental health, physical health, that has to come first. Because if that is not taken care of, if you're not acknowledging the boundaries and the constraints that puts on you, um, you can never succeed because you're always going to be fighting against you know, gravity, essentially. And of course, I always hope for people who are suffering with long-term conditions that things improve, right? And sometimes things can improve, but you don't know that, you can't count on that. And not counting, the only way things are going to improve is if you're taking care of yourself. And sometimes it's not possible for them to improve. And so living within those constraints is a way to become happy and as productive as is possible under your constraints. And I've seen enormous changes in people with chronic illness and mental health challenges when they acknowledge that's the container they live in and they got to take care of it. Like it's the only way, because I think the default is to fight it, fight the whole time and just think like, oh, well, I just need to keep pushing through this and pushing through that. And it's counterproductive. It just doesn't work. Um, okay. So see if I got to most of my stuff here. The reason this chapter is here in the book, time wise, through this sequence, is because as you're going through your open loops, as you're going through your idea debt, it really triggers the shoulds. It really triggers the should monster, and it really triggers shame about what you have not done already and how, what that means about you as, being a valid human being or not. And super, super important to take a pause right now. This chapter and the next chapter are both about your mindset and your I hate the word mindset because mindset sounds like you can kind of take it off and put it on like a hat. Um, your orientation towards your life, right? Your orientation towards your um, situation emotionally and mentally. It's really important to take a pause right now and reset and work on from now through like Monday when we meet again and we're talking about the one goal to reset and give yourself permission to let all the shame go about things that you haven't done. It's okay to feel some guilt about it as long as you're able to forgive yourself. And it's definitely okay to feel some um, grief about what has happened and what hasn't happened. I think that the feeling of grief of like, I wish that I had been the person who had finished this when I was 25. You can feel grief about that. You can feel a certain amount of regret about that without feeling like, and that means that I am an awful person who will never make it and I don't deserve it. That is where I want you to stop. So allowing yourself right now to kind of sit with all the lists you've made, breathe a little bit, and try to let go of shame, especially, and forgive yourself for anything you feel guilty about so that you can go into next week fresh and feel like you're ready to choose something and move forward with it. Uh, Next meeting on Friday will be about being brave and how do you, once you've forgiven yourself, like how do you get over the fears of being out in public? And so these two elements are going to be really, really important. Uh, I wish I had a different word for mindset. I hate the word, but like mindset issues that you're going to be confronted with over and over again and need to learn procedures to deal with. So, my challenge to you, and please go ahead and jump in with some questions. We have a few minutes for questions. I have to leave right at noon, though. My challenge to you would be to look at your list of shoulds when you do the should monster activity, and please do it, and divide it up into shoulds that are something that you actually want to do, but they feel more like idea debt for your life. Like I want to get in shape, or I want to, I don't know, repaint my kitchen, or things that you keep telling yourself you should do, but they're just things you actually want to do, but you haven't actually planned yet. And take all those things and put them on one list that are like, here are things that I would like to do. I'm not doing them right now because I've made a conscious decision to not do them right now. That's one kind of thing. And then you have another kind of a list, which is the shoulds that come from received wisdom from the world, from individuals in your life who were cruel or horrible to you, or who had different ideas about how things should work. Identify those shoulds separately and try to like pick one and take apart your own beliefs about the underlying idea and how those things fit together with, or don't, more likely, with this received wisdom that's somehow come down and is kind of poisoning your ability to be clear about what you care about. I guess that's what I want to say there. So divide those things up and ID those different lists. And I think that will help you, get much more clear about like, what are the shoulds that you just are like, they're just open loops essentially on, that you haven't started yet. And what are shoulds that are really much more toxic and need to be addressed directly. That is what I'd like you to do. And I'm going to go and do a couple questions and then I'm going to head out. So let's see. Jim says, I was raised in a 9-to-5 job, or to get a 9-to-5 job with financial stability, and the arts were always viewed as weak and not financially viable. It's caused me so much shame as I've tried to cultivate a writing career. It's so common. That's such a common issue with people being told that what you're doing is not valid because it's not making money. We're going to talk about that next time more specifically, because I think that's that is one of those many things that will keep us living in fear, because we're sort of listening to other people's voices about what we're doing here. Michi likes the differentiation between shame and guilt. Me too. That was a big eye opener for me. I really recommend Brene Brown's books. Um, Kelly, yeah, doesn't like mindset either. Yeah, change your mindset is just so stupid. It's like not that easy, but I keep working on another way to talk about it. I haven't yet. Orientation is helpful, but it's not informational enough, so I'm not really sure. Um, let's see. So Julia says, I think my should monster is essentially my ideal self dope slapping myself every time I have an idea. That's rough. That's really hard. But why? The question is why? You need to get down to underneath that top level and figure out what is it that's causing that to happen. All right, I gotta go, you guys. Thanks for being here. I'm gonna keep working on this tech, and hopefully it'll get smooth by the end of the month. Um, Next time we're gonna be talking about daring to be bad, courage and visibility, and I would like to ask you to, in this thread here, type up some takeaways in order to integrate your knowledge from today's book club. And I will pop back in later and see what everybody's saying. All right. Bye, everybody.